Hi, I'm Amanda,
And I'm Cara.
and welcome to the Historical Society podcast. Thank you for joining us.
So we just got done laughing and joking about stuff, and I'm still giggling over it.
Yeah.
I can't. Can't. We should have waited to start.
Oh, well.
Uh,
That's okay.
anyway, let's do this.
All right. So,
Episode 10.
yeah, we're on episode 10. It's a little shocking. I feel like I'm going to be saying this for a while because
You always say that, and I'm like, why is it shocking? It's the next number.
I. I think it's because it's so many, and like
Can you believe it?
each one feels like a struggle to like make sure it's done on time.
Oh,
Because
well,
yeah.
that's because you are the heartbeat of the podcast.
Fa-fum, fa-fum, fa-fum.
You're the one that does all the research. I do a little bit.
You just
No, I mean, you love history and you love digging deep, and
I do.
I respect
It
that.
just takes time. Time
It
sometimes
does.
I do not
But
have.
you work really hard at it.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
it's I admire you for it. And
Oh,
I think it's very important.
that's sweet.
Yeah. And I do find it interesting. The part for me that's hard is the research part, like the sitting down and doing it and reading the long books. And like take all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's like hard for me.
I had trouble this
Hard for
week.
my ADHD brain.
Yeah. I had trouble this week making myself sit down because I was just so tired in general. I didn't want to,
Yeah.
I actually like let myself watch TV. I watched the new episode of Dune,
Oh,
the
wait.
new
Oh yeah.
series.
Good
Yeah.
for you.
So
You deserve it.
thanks. It's very
Yeah.
sweet. Um,
Yep.
yeah. Okay. So we don't know what we're calling this episode yet. I have this title,
We had
Pilgrim.
some names, but they weren't appropriate.
Yeah, not that one, but the one I have here, it's okay, right?
Oh yes, of course. I
Okay,
think
so this could be end up being the title, Pilgrims and Indians, Thanksgiving minus the whitewashing. The other one could just be Native American history, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the idea for this basically came from the fact that Thanksgiving is right here, and we all grew up in elementary school associating Thanksgiving with this joyful occasion where the Pilgrims and Indians got together and had this big feast and everything was wonderful, and we all like probably did
Yep.
some cultural misappropriation and like
Broke bread, gave thanks.
yeah, but we made like the
Yeah.
like the Indian headbands out of construction paper and
The turkey
turkeys
hands.
and made the little pilgrim hat thingy, did all those things, but we didn't learn about obviously the harsh reality of what was really happening, what was going to happen,
Yeah.
and maybe we're too young, but we could have revisited it as we grew up to learn more
Yeah.
the realities of life. Anyway, so today we're going to kind of talk about that.
That would be too useful, Amanda. To learn about the realities of life before we're thrust into an adult world.
Yeah,
Way too logical.
it is totally.
Don't be silly.
Yeah,
It's silly.
It's silly Amanda. Tricks are for kids.
Okay. Oh God.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to try to get some of the boring part out really quickly. I need to list the sourcing so that you can,
Okay.
do your own research on this, or just learn more. So, again, Britannica.com, history.com, and worldhistory.org. And then I also looked at Plymouth 400 Legacy at their website, plymouth400inc.org. And then I did read this article. It's a National Institute of Health article. New hypothesis for cause of epidemic among Native Americans, New England, 1616 to 1619. Authors John S. Marr, John T. Cathy, written February 16th, 2010. Then another website, Historic Women of the South Coast at historicwomensouthcoast.org. And then the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe's website at Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe -nsn.gov. And the Aquinnah Wampanoag Tribe's website at Wampanoag Tribe -nsn.gov. And also National Women's History Museum, their website at womenshistory.org. And an article by Alicia Norwood entitled Sarah Hale, published in 2017. And there are a couple other
Hey,
sources.
nice job.
Thank you. There are a couple of other sources that I will talk about later, and because I kind of forgot to put them up here. But yeah. So anyway.
Good job.
Thank you.
Websites can be hard to read straight from the page like that, so
No
well
joke.
done.
I appreciate it. Okay. So the first thing I thought we would do is just kind of look at a little bit something closer related to the present. So like the actual national holiday, the history of that holiday being created. And I didn't really know any of this either. And so a woman named Sarah Josepha Hale, do you think that's how you say her name? Josepha? Josepha?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know.
Josepha Hale.
I don't. Okay. I think you might get worse when you do that.
Okay.
Yeah. So just like, pick one and go with it.
I'll call her Sarah Hale. I'll just skip that middle
There
name.
you go.
Yeah. She was a magazine editor, and I learned a little bit about her. So the reason I'm talking about her is she's the one that campaigned for creating a national holiday of, quote, Thanksgiving and praise. And so this was like her brainchild, and she pushed this for quite a long time. She is the woman who wrote "Mary Had a Little Lamb." That whole children's.
She a musician?
No, she was a more of a writer, poet kind of thing. But she wrote the poem, like the children's lullaby.
Sorry, okay.
Yeah, Mary Had a Little Lamb, which
I
became
went
a
straight
song.
to the song. Yeah, okay.
Maybe she wrote the song. I didn't read that, but who knows who wrote the
Well,
song.
it says poem here, right? So
Yeah.
I just went to the song. I went straight to the song.
Yeah. Mary Hale had a little lamb.
Amanda.
Okay, Kara senses I'm going to get stupid, nerdy, dorky.
No, I don't know. It's hard to know.
It's hard to know. Corny. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
The anxiety builds. It's just hard to know what's going to happen.
You never know. Okay, so a little bit about her really quickly. She supported women's education and abolition, but she was an anti-suffragette. She did not believe that women should get the right to vote or should have any place in politics. Their sole place should be in the home. That's her belief.
Wow.
So she's kind of controversial in that way.
Guess so.
Yeah, so there's some, it was interesting to read about her, but okay, this is a quote from the article from the National Women's History Museum by Alicia Norwood. Mary Hale used her persuasive writings to support the creation of Thanksgiving as a national holiday. Beginning in 1846, she charged the president and other leading politicians to push for the national celebration of Thanksgiving, which was then only celebrated in the Northeast. Her requests for recognition were largely ignored by politicians until 1863. While the nation was in the middle of the Civil War, President Lincoln signed into action the National Day of Thanksgiving and Praise. Hale's letter to Lincoln is often cited as the main factor in his decision. So that's where this national holiday originated. So it was long after the 1600s. Anyway, so that I didn't know that. That's
interesting.
Little tidbit. Okay.
And what was her reasoning was what?
I actually don't know. Like she felt like it was important, I guess, to have this day where people got together and thought about the things they're thankful for.
It's just interesting how we celebrate it and we link it to this past event or these past events that we'll talk about here in a minute.
Yeah.
But it's not even based upon why we celebrate.
Yeah. Well, I guess it sounds like it was a tradition in the Northeast. Right? Okay. So it is connected to this feast. But yeah.
Okay.
Oh, my mom's calling. I'm going to hit end.
Well.
Hi, Mom. What's up? Okay. Okay. All right, we're going to move on. So what I wanted to do now. So the Thanksgiving Day feast technically would have happened in 1621. So that's the when we think about the Pilgrims and the Native Americans, that's the time, the year. But I wanted to focus a little bit on setting us up into that time frame. I thought we would start a little bit around, first I wanted to talk about the Native Americans who lived in that area They were the Wampanoag Tribe, and they lived in this particular, place in Plymouth. Obviously, was the southeastern Massachusetts, and they lived there for over 10,000 years before the Pilgrims ever showed up. Right, so they've been
Wow.
living there a long time. And the culture, around the 1600s, the culture of the tribe was of one of a traditional economy based around agriculture and fishing. And they occupied other parts of the area, so parts of modern day Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and then the islands off the coast, like Martha's Vineyard.
Yep.
So they were kind of all around that area. And from Britannica, they described the tribe as being semi-sedentary, meaning they moved seasonally between fixed sites. And at that time, their diet was largely based around maize, corn, game, and fish. And the tribe itself had like smaller villages, and each of the smaller villages had a chief or a sachem. I think that's how you say it. And
Cool.
there was like a head chief as well who kind of like coordinated
Over all the tribe?
Yeah, coordinated that Wampanoag, different little village tribes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so the European settlers who were coming to this part of America, this was the tribe that they were coming in contact with. And the land at the time, the Pilgrims ended up calling that area Plymouth Rock. It was actually called Pawtuxet. And so that's what the Indians were calling that plot of like area of land.
And then renamed by the Pilgrims.
Yeah, we know it as Plymouth, but that like area where Plymouth was known as Pawtuxet.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so an event happened in 1614 that is related to all of this. A guy named Captain Thomas Hunt was a trader, and he came to, that area, and he met some of the Wampanoag tribal members, and he had basically tried to convince them to board his ship to trade with him, but he did so under false pretense, and he abducted, I've read, 24 men from the Wampanoag tribe, and then chained them up, went back to, I was going to say flew back to Spain. I'm like, wait, no. Sailed back to Spain. Sailed back to Spain and sold them into slavery. So it was like horrible. And
Wow.
during this time, so that was 1614, because the Europeans, they were starting to come to America. They were starting to have contact with the tribal people. They were bringing with them diseases, basically, that the tribal community had no immunity to because they had never, gotten in touch with or had exposure to
No immunity,
bacterium and
No
bacteria.
No antibodies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I'll talk really quickly about that epidemic, basically. So the poor Native Americans, they came into contact with a bunch of different diseases at that time. And I've seen certain areas, like the estimates are like 50% of a tribal community would be wiped out. There was another one that was like 90%. So it was
Wow.
really awful. And so there's a particular one that happens around this time that was debated as to like what it was exactly, what disease. And I found this kind of interesting. This was the NIH article that I referenced earlier in the sourcing, that they think it was, and I'll make sure I get this right, leptospirosis complicated by vial syndrome. And so
I don't know what the syndrome is, but I've heard of leptospirosis.
yeah, don't dogs get a vaccine for that?
I think so.
I feel like, I think it's like because it's kind of a common bacteria.
Sorry to
now.
interrupt you here.
Yeah,
But Coda is at my door whining. Do you think she needs a snack?
I gave her stuff.
Okay. You did? What'd you give her?
I gave her.
Just makes me sad. She
I
makes it
know.
sound so dire. She's like,
Well, she just went on a walk, right?
she did.
Well, I mean,
But that's not a treat.
no, I could give her one here in a sec. I could like just go get her one. Okay. And we could keep going. You could like tell a joke or something.
I mean, To tide her over, I
Yeah.
could tell a joke.
You could tell a joke. Yeah. You could, So, all right. I'll finish the
One
leptos.
leptospirosis walked into a. Just kidding.
Exactly. That's pretty good. You could tell the peanut one.
What's that one?
Okay, so guys, we'll say it. Leptospirosis goes to a bar and sits down. And he's like, bartender, give me a drink. And bartender comes down and gives him a drink. The leptospirosis is sitting there. And he hears this, I like your shirt. And the guy's like, what? What is that? And then he hears like, that's a nice haircut. And eventually he's like, bartender, come down here. I don't know what's happening. I'm hearing things. The bartender's like, oh yeah, that's the complimentary peanuts. I had to.
Okay.
I heard that from Jerry Pagano recently. I was like, well, I should probably.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay. So what part of the reason why these particular
Well,
go ahead.
since we talked about the dog thing, do you want to call her down and give her a treat?
Okay. So Cara will keep you. Cara, this is all yours now. You take over.
Okay, but just be quick.
I'll be
I
quick.
Don't know what to say.
Okay, I'll call Coda. All right. Tell another joke. Okay, be back.
Okay.
Coda!
I just feel bad. She just.
You want a crunchy?
I don't know. She makes it sound so dire, like she's hurting. She came to my door and whined, and then I heard her fall against the wall like she was done with life. I feel sorry for her. And actually, in her defense, her dinner time is now. It's 5:06. So this is the time when she would whine, but it just like breaks my heart. So, oh,
What you been saying about me?
thank you. I felt bad for her.
Aw.
Just make sure she's okay because we're talking right through her dinner time.
Oh, that's true. That's why she's whining.
So, yeah, and it's not that she hasn't waited in her life, but
Right. I gave her 2 big crunchies.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
She'll be fine.
So,
Cool. Thank you.
yes. Okay.
Okay. Back to it.
All right. So leptospirosis. So the reason why these doctors ended up thinking this could be a possible explanation, part of it also is like nobody really actually 100% knows, but there was something where leptospirosis would have probably traveled in on the rats on the ships, and it would have been easy to have the rats then like wander ashore. And the other thing that it's really horrible to think of, but there's documentation that they like the Native Americans, when they would get this particular disease, that they would turn yellow. So obviously it's like some people thought it was
Wow.
yellow fever or something like that. But in the end, these particular doctors think it was this bacteria combined with this other syndrome. And yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so that's
awful.
Yeah, and so I wanted to highlight that just because, when Europeans showed up, like it was not good for the native population.
Yeah, of course not.
So they're first like hit with all these different terrible diseases, smallpox, all these things coming ashore, and then this particular time frame was possibly that bacteria. Anyway, so one of the 24 men that was abducted by Thomas Hunt was, I believe you pronounce the actual name Tisquantum, and he would eventually become known as Squanto. And somehow, I find this really amazing. So he's taken to Spain. He somehow manages to end up in England. He learns English, and then he comes back on a ship back to this village. And when he returns, unfortunately, he missed this epidemic, and a lot of the people that he knew were gone. Like most people, it was wiped out, basically. It's really, really sad. But Tisquantum played.
And that would have been. Sorry to interrupt you, but that would have been in the course of 7 years ish.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
It's not very long.
No.
Okay.
It's really sad. Very sad. There's a website, I believe it was either the Mashpee or the Aquina site. There is like kind of like a reenactment of poetry and things and dramatization of how some of the Native Americans may have felt like the Native Americans who
Yeah.
were taken, the men who were taken, and then their wives and their families who were left behind. So it's pretty moving.
That's awful.
Okay, so we've kind of fast forward up to 1621, and Squanto is back. He's there now, and he speaks English. And he's a central figure in basically allowing the Pilgrims to survive. That scared me. Coda is not happy.
Probably Amazon drug or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so at some point, when the Pilgrims show up, there's like 100-ish Pilgrims who show up on the Mayflower. They land in Plymouth Rock, right? They land in Pawtuxet. And they spend a fair amount of the time on the ship while they go on to try to build their first building and like a watchtower or something like that. And over the course of this time, while they're trying to get established, 50% of them die. So they're like 50 people left because of starvation, probably some diseases, probably like the elements and things like that, because it's like brutal. I believe they landed like mid-December. And so it's not good.
Awful.
And so eventually the kindness of the Indians, of the Native Americans, is why the Pilgrims survived at all. That was really fascinating to me. And so they didn't know they didn't know what crops to grow. They were having probably trouble with everything. So, like just, obviously 50% of the people had already died. And so Squanto ends up, because he speaks English, helping the Pilgrims out. So he teaches them how to hunt. He teaches them how to plant crops and fertilize them appropriately and which crops to plant. And I've read that there's also like a sharing of technology back and forth. And so, I'm sure it was scary at first, but because you had this Native American who was speaking English, and there was the tribal chief at the time, Massasoit, he wanted to create basically a peace treaty with the Pilgrims because I think I've read, he felt like they would be good trading partners. And so there was this original working relationship that existed there. Your camera got blurry all of a sudden. Do you know? Am I blurry to you?
Yeah, so did yours. So did yours.
Huh.
It's saying actual recording quality is higher, so
Okay, well that's good.
it's going to depend upon that. So.
Yeah.
Yours is quite blurry still.
Yeah, so I guess as long as our audio is okay, we'll
Yeah,
survive.
I mean, audio seems fine on my end.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so
We want to keep moving forward.
yes. Yeah. And so basically what ends up happening, so because of Massasoit's peace treaty, there's a time of peace, basically, it's almost 40 years until Massasoit ends up dying. Unfortunately, during this time, you have other European settlers who are showing up. And so the pressure is building, basically, because as more European settlers show up, more land is being taken from the Native Americans. So this is their land. This is where they've lived for thousands of years. And now you have these people showing up, basically like wanting this land. And it's going to interrupt, their way of life. It's going to interrupt the wildlife, migration patterns, all sorts of things.
All the while, though, they still are helping them.
Yeah. And so I found it interesting that despite this, like, probably powder keg that's kind of brewing there, there's still peace. But when Massasoit dies, though, that's when, it all goes away, basically. And so I think that's what we don't learn about in school. We don't learn about the fact that the only reason the Pilgrims survived was because of the Native Americans, like the goodness, the humanity, the sharing of knowledge, the kindness of the Native Americans. Without that, they would have just all died, I'm sure. And then, so there was a literal feast on, like a quote unquote Thanksgiving feast, where most of the food was actually brought by the Native Americans, was brought by Massasoit and Squanto and their the tribal family. So there was all this generosity that was being shown, from from the Native Americans to the European settlers. Okay, so things went south because basically the state of affairs deteriorated partly as a result of Europeans' poor treatment of the Native Americans, cultural encroachment, and of course settlers wanting more land in general. So that's the answer there. And we'll get more into that. Like I want to focus a little bit on the Europeans' poor treatment of Native Americans as well. We'll get to that in a second. Sorry, Coda's.
Well, do you want to like try to comfort her? You haven't said anything to her.
Well, I guess I'm trying not to. Well, she doesn't listen to me usually.
Oh,
I could try, but I'm trying to kind of, yeah.
I got it. Okay.
I don't know. Coda. Coda. Oh, that kind of worked.
Yeah, she does listen. You just don't ever bother to do.
I'm like, she'll stop when she's ready. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
That was pretty good.
It's like the treat thing. When you're home, she whines. When you go somewhere and leave and it's just me, she sits and goes to sleep. Because she knows it doesn't work on me.
She's got me wrapped around her finger.
No, it worked on me just a minute ago because it's her dinner time. It's unfair.
Oh.
But
Yeah. Okay. All right. So anyway, so there's basically a war that ends up happening where certain tribes join together to go to try to drive the European settlers out. And I didn't realize it, but actually some Native Americans joined the European settlers. Oh, I found that kind of shocking.
who waged war? Who was it?
So the guy was the son of Metasoyut. His name is
So he was a Native American that waged war?
Yeah, Metacom. And I think they called him King Philip. They named him, I don't know why.
The English
named
named
him King Philip.
Oh.
I don't get that,
Okay.
given that was not his
That's weird.
name. Yeah. And that war took place 1675 to 1676. He was killed, and this is really gruesome. He was killed, he was beheaded and quartered, and then his head was placed on a spear outside of Plymouth.
Wow.
So it was like, whoa, terrible.
Wow.
Yeah, and so the treatment of Native Americans, you know, you had suffering from the European diseases, and then you had the stealing of their land and their lifestyle, and then you had
Yeah.
them killing them, right?
Yeah.
And then they would take, if the people they didn't kill, a lot of times they would imprison them and then sell them off into slavery somewhere else, ship them out. So it was just like this really horrible treatment of the Native American people. And this was their land. And it was stolen, basically. And that's not something that, we learn. It doesn't look good. People don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about reality.
From a very practical standpoint, I mean, anyone would be upset over someone just moving in and taking what's someone else has inhabited.
Right.
It's a very natural human reaction.
Right. Yeah, but it's been justified and pretended like it wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
But we'll talk. I have some quotes. Actually, it's here. This is where I have the quotes. Okay, so.
And there could probably have been something like, if people are coming in and they need like a place of refuge or something, it seems like the Native Americans would have taken them in, but why didn't, it could have, I don't picture that it went down that way of just like acclimating to their way of life and, building upon what they had already started.
Right. Well,
You know what I mean? And not just trying to change everything.
right. And I think, I went to a website, the historic Ipswich website, and it has a bunch of quotes from people around that time frame, or people.
Cool.
Yeah. So the one I wanted to focus on, and so the Mayflower, the Pilgrims, we later on were called the Pilgrims. I think originally they were like the Pilgrim Fathers, and then they were Puritans, and I want to say it was like 50% of the people who came over were of that particular religious belief system. It was a very like strict kind of belief system, and they had been kicked out of England. They had gone originally to the Netherlands, and then didn't feel like they had enough freedom there, so they ended up deciding to go to America basically. And this first quote, his name is John Winthrop, and he was the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And I've got a date down here. So he was writing this in 1633 and 1634. So this is still during the time when there was peace. But it's just interesting to me because of how he interprets events, right? So he says, quote, "For the natives, they are near all dead of the smallpox. So the Lord hath cleared our title to what we possess. The mortality among them was very great, and it increased among them daily more and more, insomuch as that the poor creatures, being very timorous of death, would fain have fled from it, but could not tell how, unless they could have gone from themselves." So he is saying that the Lord has done this, that has killed off all these people, right? So that's how he's viewing this. And something he wrote, so I took this from Britannica. So John Winthrop did not actually come over on the Mayflower. He came over on a ship called the Arabella, and it was the spring of 1630. So it was 9 years after that Thanksgiving Day, quote unquote. He composed this in a sermon called "A Model of Christian Charity." Found that last word a little laughable.
Wow.
So he pictured the Massachusetts colonists in covenant with God and with each other, divinely ordained to build, quote, "a city upon a hill" in New England. And he says, "If we deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword throughout the world." So he's believing that, I don't think I need to read the rest of this, but he believes this is a God-ordained mission for the Pilgrims. And so when the Native Americans die, he views it as God. God did that to those people, right? And so that's nuts.
But he wasn't even there.
He wasn't, but there were still diseases happening at this point, I'm sure. Because there were...
But whose fault is that?
The Europeans for showing up. That's whose fault it is. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so the other thing...
That's akin to people, talking about hurricanes wiping out
I know
subsets of people that they don't agree with.
And so this is what I always think about. People's view of God tends to grant them permissions to do terrible things, right? So if you think God is vengeful, judgmental, very wrathful, very vengeful, only certain people are good and these people are bad, then you have permission to be like that, right? So these people thought, well, this is our land. We've been ordained to be here. We are chosen by God. And so we're going to go out and murder all these people and ship them off for slavery. But that's their view of God.
Because God.
Because why?
But it's cool because God.
Because God, yeah.
Because God said so.
Yeah, because God said so. And it's really sad. But anytime you see, I just think people's view of God, or maybe people's view of no God, or whatever kind of, you can create this system that allows violence, basically, and terrible things to happen based around that. Because there are Christians who don't believe that, who don't have that type of worldview, and there are Christians who do. And you probably will see it in almost every religion. And that's why when you join a religion with a violent based kind of system, national system, that's when really bad things happen, because people do things that if they didn't believe that way, they wouldn't do. But okay, the other quote. So King James the First, that's where the King James Bible comes from. So he was alive during this time too. And he said that it was God who brought the plague on those people as well. So these are their beliefs. And then you have this guy, and I forgot to look up when he lived. His name was Increase Mather, and he wrote A Brief History of the War with the Indians in New England. And Increase Mather, I feel like that's an old name from colonial America. So
yeah, I've heard of it. I've heard it before.
Yeah, and so he wrote. This is another example. that the heathen people amongst whom we live, and whose land the Lord God of our fathers hath given to us for rightful possession, have at sundry times been plotting mischievous devices against that part of the English Israel, which is seated in these goings down of the sun. No man that is an inhabitant of any considerable standing can be ignorant. So he's saying,
Wow.
God gave this to me, and God's killing you. Like, it's just like,
Wow.
whoa. So, I mean, so talk about like the treatment. So, if you believe these people are heathens, like you somehow are granted permission by God to do atrocities, to commit atrocities. And it's shocking and it's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And their reasoning for that, I mean, what makes them heathens in their mind? Because they don't embrace the same faith that they did?
Oh, I'm sure.
Is that the
That, and
I mean, we haven't talked about it. I guess we don't fully know.
I'm sure that was part of it. I'm sure it's because they were different than them. You know, I mean, they viewed themselves as,
And the other,
yeah. I mean, they viewed themselves
them
as
versus us.
righteous, as holy, as, you know. So if you already have this view of yourself as this extraordinary thing, and you meet someone who's not like you, we're like, well, that must be of the devil, you know.
Well, and I also don't understand. I mean, you and I grew up in Christianity, and it's never made sense to me. I mean, yes, the Bible is there as reference, the Word of God. But I've always read the opening of the Bible as the Word of God was Jesus. And Jesus has this, like, Jesus is the lens with which we view things. And so, and it, short of God talking to someone, how do they know what God thinks or wants, like, specifically? It's just so, like, mind-blowing to me. I don't think I would ever deign to put words in God's mouth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you also,
Or a higher power, or whatever you believe.
right. Yeah.
What do you mean? Also, what?
Well, I was thinking like, you know, these people are these Christian people, but like
You're talking about these people in
the
particular?
Pilgrims, yeah, the Pilgrims, and also I mean, just extend it out into like later on in America, you have slave owners, you know, who use these little tiny Bible verses to justify owning slaves, having slaves, treating people like dirt and animals, and you know,
Yeah.
just
Yep.
horrible atrocities, and they're
I know.
justifying it with the Bible, and at the same time, they've missed the message there,
Missed the mark,
you know.
which is the definition of sin.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because they, you know, like today they want to put the Ten Commandments up on in every classroom, right? You know, but if we
Yep.
would, you know, thou shalt not kill, and that's like all that these people did, basically. You know, I mean, early on, when that initial time of peace, there was apparently a relationship between those people and the Native Americans that was probably sort of okay, but I'm sure
Yeah.
that these people were trying to convert them as well. So it wasn't like,
Did you
oh,
say people?
people, did I? I'm sure these people were trying to convert them.
Oh, I felt at home. I'm from Texas. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say? Oh, I wanted to say real quick, just since we're on the topic of, Christianity, everybody has their own journey with faith and spirituality and, religion. But just because, we're talking specifically about Christianity here, it doesn't have to be, even if you agree that this is wrong, which I believe it is wrong what they did here. It doesn't have to define Christianity for you. Just because someone has mirrored it to you in a way that is not Christ-like doesn't mean that is equal to what it should be or what it is in its pure form.
Right. I think it's difficult.
Just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. I also think it's difficult, though, sometimes to extricate the two because you're seeing
100%.
And also, like,
100%.
Yeah.
Not saying it's not.
Yeah.
I think for me, I mean, you and I have talked about this a lot in our faith journeys, but like, we probably disagree there. Like, because there's like spiritual trauma. I'm guessing we disagree there. There's the view of like spiritual trauma, like coloring what you think of what you see and happen in the world around you. And then my point of view is sort of like, that wasn't what it was meant to do. That wasn't how it was meant to be
Right.
practiced,
Yeah.
in my view.
Yeah.
And so it's just not right. So that's not what it is.
Right.
That's not Christianity, in my view.
Right. Yeah.
So those are just two ways of looking at it. Can I go potty? I had a big coffee.
Oh my gosh, you may. I don't have any other
Thank
jokes
you.
to tell though, but I'll keep going I'll keep going.
Oh, I believe in you. You got this.
I got
girl.
this. I got this. Okay.
You give the people what they
I'll
want.
give the people what they want.
You already told the peanut joke, which
I
I,
know.
thought was pretty good.
Thank you very much. That's like the one I
You're
know.
right.
That's basically all I got. Okay, so where I was going with all of this is that, Native Americans today do not really celebrate Thanksgiving, especially people from that area who still live in that area, descendants and members of the Wampanoag Tribe. They refer to the day of Thanksgiving as the National Day of Mourning. And I took this paragraph. So there's another website I haven't mentioned yet called the Potawatomi website at potawatomi.org. It's spelled Potawatomi. And Potawatomi means people of the place of the fire. And this article on their website is called The True Dark History of Thanksgiving. And it was written on November 25th of 2020. And this is just a paragraph. In an article published by Indian Country Today in 2011, Thanksgiving Day is a time of grief for Native Americans. Many Native Americans continue to gather at Coles Hill near Plymouth Rock and remember the losses experienced for the past 400 plus years through the National Day of Mourning. The event began in 1970 when the Commonwealth of Massachusetts invited Wamsuta Frank James to address the public on behalf of the Wampanoag people. However, once organizers learned the subjects of his speech, which included highlighting the death and broken promises at the hand of settlers, colonial powers, and the United States, James was no longer invited. This prompted the formation of the National Day of Mourning. And so I found that interesting, like even in 1970, when someone wanted to say, hey, let's talk about what really happened at this ceremony, he was forbidden to attend. I just found that really profound.
Feels like
yeah,
people don't like to talk about hard things.
right. Yeah.
And also maybe people don't want to like admit bad acts, admit that they were duped or
Right.
not duped, that they did a bad thing.
Right. Yeah. It's weird to me because this is happening in our culture right now, when it comes to slavery and discrimination and racism and sexism and all of that, like a swath of our population, they don't want to talk about it. And this is part of that. This is part of the racism. This is part of the, the atrocities of what happened when colonialism happened here. They don't want to talk about it either. But this is our history.
We've talked about this too. Yeah, we've talked about this too, like sort of the idea that when you see something's wrong and you like remove the Jenga piece or the card, the whole house of cards falls or the whole game falls over.
Right.
I think that's sort of maybe how people feel. They're like, well, the whole way I view everything is going to crumble if I change this one little thing.
Right.
That's not reality, but it's a fear.
I also think there are Christian
Fear-based.
nationalists who believe who believe what the
100%,
Pilgrims
there's
believed.
that.
They're like, this was
Then there's
ours,
that.
and those people had to die. I think there are people who, unfortunately, might be Trump cabinet picks who have those beliefs, and it's scary that that's still happening, and
Yep.
it's crazy.
That's true. I mean, I guess I'm speaking hopefully from a place where, people are like from a standpoint of wanting to grow and learn and change and be better, but that's not everyone.
Right.
That's not how everyone lives.
No, I wish everybody did. But we're
be
trying to do that kind of with this podcast, like talk about the hard things, talk about the things that people don't want to talk about, because it's awareness is the first step. Yeah.
True.
And so the day after Thanksgiving, and I did not know this, is actually the Native American Heritage Day. So Black Friday when everyone's out trying to get their sales, is a day, that we should remember and reflect on this history. And on Thanksgiving, I mean, and every day, right? But that's
Yeah.
a national day. Okay, so that's kind of what we wanted to talk about, kind of Thanksgiving and kind of Native American history in this country and the hard stuff. We were going to then celebrate 2 women of the past and 1 woman of the present. And
Okay.
I got this. So I don't know. There's the first woman we were going to highlight lived sometime in the 15th century. So like somewhere in like the 1100s. That doesn't make any sense. That would have been the 1400s. So my site has 1142 or 15th century. That doesn't make, so maybe there isn't, maybe it's so like the history is so bad, like the keeping of the history, that she could have lived anywhere there. But 1142 is very specific.
Or maybe she's a vampire and she lived the whole time.
That would be awesome. I'm all about the witches and vampires books. Maybe we should write one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll let you start. Get on that.
Okay, I will. Yeah, a vampire Native American woman who lasts forever. She's going to save us. She's going to save us from what's happening.
And haunt the bad people.
That's right.
Haunt them.
Yeah. Okay, so unfortunately, I don't know how to pronounce this first name, and it's spelled a bunch of different ways. So it's
Just do your best.
Jigon Sasi or Yagon Sasi or
Just no, you don't need to do
because they're different
Amanda,
spellings
just try
even.
one.
They're different spellings as
Okay.
well. So so there was this lady. And she was integral to the origins of the
What if you spell
Haudenosaunee.
it?
Okay,
What if
so
you spell it?
All right, so one
Because none
spelling.
of those pronunciations were helpful.
So it's spelled Jigonhsassee. That's one spelling. And the other one has a K instead of the G. Okay.
And she became known as the Mother of Nations and established the policy of women choosing the chiefs of the council.
Exactly. So that's kind of the basis of. So there was this during the time of the women's suffrage, some of the women learned about the fact that women in Native American cultures were part of the political governing system. And they were like, hey, if they can do it, we should too, basically. And so apparently that system was started by, she helped start that system where a council of elder women would choose the chiefs and basically would have the power to say, we don't like what you're doing, you're fired. And then they pick a new chief.
Wow.
Which is pretty amazing.
Cool.
Yeah. And so her story is interesting. She was kind of like, she had access to these. So there were like 5 warring tribes, I believe. And there was a guy who wanted them all to come together and live in peace. And she helped broker that peace. And she came up with this system, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. So the next woman actually lived and was part of the Wampanoag Tribe. And she lived during this time frame that we talked about in the 1600s. They say that she probably lived somewhere like 1635 to 1676. And unfortunately, she was killed in battle at 41. But she was actually a female chief. She was one of the, I forget how to say the other name, but I'll just call her a chief. She was chief of the Pocasset Wampanoag Nation.
Do you
And
want to spell her name too?
yes, so her name is Weetamoo, Weetamoo.
Cool.
And she was the sister-in-law of Metacomet or Metacum, who was referred to as King Philip. He was the son of Massasoit. And so they're related in that way. And she ended up, this was kind of interesting. So during that war between the European settlers and the Native Americans, her tribe captured somebody named Mary Rawlinson. So she was a colonist, and she lived 1637 to 1711. But she wrote about her time that she was captured, and she described Weetamoo as the description is an impressive figure with a commanding personality who dressed purposefully to convey her standing as an individual of authority. And Witamu's reputation was one of a fearless leader, and she was a legend, basically, among the colonists. And this says, sadly, that she was drowned, and then she also was beheaded, and her head was placed as outside of a town in Massachusetts. So it's just like
Good grief.
so brutal. But she is remembered by her people as a great freedom fighter and a symbol of resistance to colonial policies of land theft and enslavement of indigenous people. Yeah. So those are the two women. I found that really profound. Two female leaders, two extraordinary women. The woman from the present is Deb Haaland, and she is the Secretary of the Interior still. She was nominated by Joe Biden.
And
Yeah,
that's spelled Haaland.
right.
It doesn't sound exactly like it's, I mean,
Right. I watched a video to, hopefully I said her name correctly, Holland. Yeah, but you're right.
yeah, sure. No, I mean, it looks like it, but maybe not the traditional way you would spell Holland,
Right. And so
or the first thing you might go to.
Deb Haaland, her tribe is not from this part of the country, the Northeast, but she's a member of the Pueblo of Laguna and a 35th generation New Mexican. And she is the first Native American to serve as a cabinet secretary. She grew up in a military family. Okay, I'm just going to give you a couple brief things here. Both her parents were decorated military veterans. And let's see, give a couple information. She enrolled at the University of New Mexico. I got to go there this past summer for a trauma conference. And she earned her bachelor's degree in English and then later her law degree from the UNM Law School. And let's see, she ran her own small business producing and canning Pueblo salsa. That's cool. She served as a tribal administrator. Yeah, that's what it says.
Cool.
And she became the first woman elected to the Laguna Development Corporation Board of Directors, overseeing business operations of the second largest tribal gaming enterprise in New Mexico. She successfully advocated for the Laguna Development Corporation to create policies and commitments to environmentally friendly business practices. Through her public service, she has broken barriers and opened doors of opportunity for future generations. And she ran for the New Mexico Lieutenant Governor, and she became the first Native American woman to be elected to lead a state party. Yeah, and she is one of the first Native American women to serve in Congress. And while she was in Congress, she focused on environmental justice, climate change, missing and murdered Indigenous women, and family-friendly policies. So just wanted to highlight her. And so she's still a cabinet member, but, will no longer be that when Trump takes office. So
Very cool.
yeah. So that is the end of the episode. I just want to say thank you for we had a bunch of interruptions today that don't normally happen, but this is we're not going to edit. I don't have time to do anything, so I'm not going to edit this.
Why should we? It's real life.
It's real life. This is a low budget effort. But you got to hear Coda again. She made her presence known, and thank you so much for joining us, and happy Thanksgiving, and also National Day of Mourning. Not happy, but we'll remember the National Day of Mourning.
But good to acknowledge the realities we live in.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts, Kara?
Well, no.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see you next time, episode 11. Take care.
All right. Thank you.